Let's go. Back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. We're live streaming here. This is Friday
Yes,
happy hour
sir.
on the
Yeah,
East
we're just
Coast,
chilling.
5:18 p.m. Eastern time. We both got what we call a pod bourbon or a pod burb. A
Cheers.
little bit different because we're live streaming here. We're Twitch streamers at this point, but we'll give guys a minute to hop in. We're doing a free agency preview. We're going to be going through every single position. Who are the free agents that are going to be hitting the market? I know everyone's talking about rookies as far as Dynasty right now, but free agency happens first, and we happen to be just feel like we're kind of skipping over it. Outside of a few of the big names like Chris Godwin.
Yeah, man. The free agency piece is so important. Honestly, if you're just tuning in as an NFL fan, welcome. We're going to make a lot of good predictions and go down narrative street with some of these guys. A loaded free agent class at this point. And then obviously for our Dynasty players, even redraft players, it's going to shape up what the ADPs are going to be for next season. And obviously, our core Dynasty players, this is the wheelhouse. This is where you can start to place your bets on some of these guys. A lot of interesting names, the Juju Smith-Schusters, Michael Gallup, Allen Robinson, some guys that have seen values decline. Free agency can be their saving grace and give them that second chance. Or for some guys, it can actually tank their value. We think about Devontae Adams, another huge free agent this season. Obviously, what happens with Aaron Rodgers is kind of priority one. But Devontae Adams himself could go somewhere else, regardless of where Aaron Rodgers goes or what happens with him. So now is when you have to kind of push your chips on some of these guys or take them out to optimize value in Dynasty. And this is the gambling part of the season. And this is the part that matters because rookie landing spots aren't really going to be shaped up on, is Denver really a prime landing spot for a rookie quarterback? Who knows? If Aaron Rodgers goes there, it's not, So we're going to have to see where some of these guys land before we can start thinking about these rookie landing spots, but it's going to be fun.
100%. And again, we'll go through all the names. We're actually going to have a 2022 free agency cheat sheet with best landing spots, with all the free agent names that are relevant for us in the fantasy football sphere. We are just going to be talking about fantasy today, all the skill position players. Won't go into too many defensive transactions. Alex, if you want to throw a few in there, we can. But if you want to one, join the conversation with us, but two, get access to that free agency cheat sheet. That way you have everything just loaded up, right? As you're going through your leagues, looking at different transactions, trying to understand what quarterbacks are available, what wide receivers are going to be on the move. You can just take a quick look. And these landing spots are going to be important come rookie season as well. So we'll post that in the Discord channel, that full cheat sheet with landing spots and player names, even some cap space data in there. Put it all together here. But Alex, let's start with some quarterbacks. The quarterback class is from a free agent standpoint. We've already talked about this a little bit on the show with, the dynasty value of a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo or Marcus Mariota or Mitchell Trubisky. All of these guys, except for Jimmy G, he's still actually under contract in 2022. But the reason why those type of names are so compelling is because there's not a huge competitive market of quarterbacks they're going to have to compete with. So seeing a name like Kirk Cousins potentially on the trading block, Jimmy G on the trading block, those are some of the premium names. Those are the headliners here. We don't have the Lamar Jacksons, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens hitting the market. It's just not happening this year. So the top quarterback names, good point on that. Yeah. We'll see if guys like Tua and Baker get extensions. If Derek Carr, how much longer is he going to be the quarterback? Daniel Jones, how much longer is he going to be the QB? It seems like New York wants to roll with him at least for another year. I probably wouldn't do that if I were in their position, but that's what it looks like. It's trending. So the quarterback names, I'm just going to run through them here. Ryan Fitzpatrick is a free agent at almost 40 years old. Played half a game for the Washington football team. Washington Commanders. Andy Dalton is a free agent. I've actually heard rumors. I was talking with some Bengals fans last night in the Discord channel saying, hey, we would love to see Andy Dalton actually come back to Cincinnati and be a prime backup for Joe Burrow because he is taking so many hits. What up, Don Juan? Shout out to Don Juan from the Discord.
That's good.
Been playing this guy in fantasy. I'm interested to see where Don Juan ends the season.
Don Juan's got some tricks up his sleeve in this Dynasty league.
I feel it.
That's for sure.
But Andy Dalton as a backup to Joe Burrow could be really interesting. Tyrod Taylor is another name that could come in and just be a bridge for any of these teams. Obviously, don't love it from a fantasy perspective. Then the rest of them here, Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett, Cam Newton, Teddy Bridgewater, Marcus Mariota, and Mitchell Trubisky. Alex, are there any of those names that stand out to you either as buy lows or guys that we should have our eyes on in the fantasy sphere?
Honestly, not really. You mentioned, I'm glad you brought it up because this year's free agent quarterback class is pretty weak. A lot of these guys just scream veteran backup to me. If any of these guys are starters in 2022, it could be for one of these teams that plans on drafting a rookie so that they don't have to rush their rookie in right away. So it could be similar to what we saw from Andy Dalton this year. He had some games as the starter. Off the top of my head, I want to say maybe he had one good game in there that was fantasy relevant. So long-term value is probably not going to be there for these guys. Fitzmagic's probably going to retire. If I had to pick one, and this might be a hot take, I think Marcus Mariota is the most interesting name on this list. You'd look at Dalton, he's done. Cam, Tyrod, Jacoby Brissett, Trubisky, they all feel done from a fantasy football perspective. I think they'll have value in the league. I think maybe Teddy Bridgewater finds his way back into a starting job at some point, but we know he hasn't been a reliable fantasy option in the past. So Marcus Mariota, to me, is the most interesting. With the Vegas Raiders, we saw him as the backup to Derek Carr, but when he got opportunities, he played well. He showed he can still get it done with his legs. He showed ability to come in utility situations. So Mariota, to me, I think as maybe a quarterback 3 in a super flex league could be interesting. And you can probably snag Mariota for a mid to late third rounder at this point. So Mariota is interesting if he can find a spot where he can compete for a job. But outside of that, I do think the interesting quarterback market and the shakeups are going to come from Jimmy Garoppolo, from maybe Derek Carr, Carson Wentz, Kirk Cousins, all these guys that have trade rumors, but we're not really sure what's going to happen. The Eagles are players. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Jalen Hurts. And then obviously we have Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers, who are kind of the big 3. And wherever they go could create a ripple effect and a domino effect for these free agents and for the rookies.
It really hurts for these teams that need a quarterback this year. And hopefully these GMs, these front offices had the foresight before the year to say, hey, we don't want to be searching for a franchise quarterback in 2022 because the rookie class isn't that great either. And you have teams like Carolina, probably in the market for a quarterback. Denver, we know they are. They've just been continually putting together with different bridge names and guys that are kind of flaming out. Atlanta could be in full rebuild before we know it. The Washington football team needs a quarterback. New Orleans needs a QB with Jameis Winston being a free agent. Taysom Hill is the only QB they have signed right now. Could be a prime landing spot for a rookie as well. And then Pittsburgh with Big Ben retiring and Tampa Bay with Tom Brady retiring. So there's a lot of turnover in these QB spots. So if it's not a guy from trade, if it's not one of these free agents like a Tyrod Taylor, Jacoby Brissett, Marcus Mariota, Mitch Trubisky, then you're relying on names in the draft, and you don't want to start these guys from day one. Kenny Pickett is probably the most pro-ready of the QBs from what I'm seeing in the mock drafts, from what the film grinders are saying, and just from what I've personally seen looking at his stats and just some preliminary research into this class. Matt Corral could be one, but he's probably going to come into the year hurt. Then you have some project names like Carson Strong. He's going to be a project, but he has the tools. Malik Willis has some appeal as a rusher, could develop as a passer, does have that big arm. He's another project type guy like a Josh Allen when he came into the league. Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, he's kind of a coin flip. I personally like Sam Howell. I think a team will take a gamble on Sam Howell, but I've seen a lot of people who are totally fading Sam Howell, saying he's not even a day one. He's more of like a day 3, early day 3 type name. I don't know. He seemed to have fallen off in that senior season, or junior season, I should say. But it's rough for some of these situations. Best case scenario, in my opinion, would be for a Denver or honestly, Carolina has weapons, and a Pittsburgh has weapons. A Tampa Bay has weapons. Would love to see a Mariota go to one of those teams. I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, but that's like a best case scenario if we're talking free agent quarterbacks in 2022 and prime landing spots.
Yeah, I agree. I think you said it best. The quarterback class this year is going to be a little bit different than last year, at least in my expectation. And before I go, Phil, Andy, Greg, what's up? We got some OGs.
What's up, boys?
Good to see everybody. Ash, Kenny, we're going to talk about Juju here in a little once we get past QBs and running backs, so don't worry. But
I just acquired
Andy
some
Juju. Half the DMS Pioneers League is here. So for those of you that aren't in the Pioneers League, join our Discord. It's linked below, and that's where you can find leagues to play with Stef and I. If you are tuning in from the Pioneers League, shoot me some trade offers. I'm just like trade happy right now. I think I'm just like a little bit depressed. The season's over. I'm trying to get some deals done. So send it out. Always happy to shoot out a counter. But Steph, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because the rookie quarterbacks this year, it feels like are not going to be as pro ready as some of the guys last year. So if you are a contending team, if you are one of these teams that has a mid to late first, and you're relying on a rookie quarterback to get you to the championship, you're like, oh, I'm going to draft a quarterback in this year's class, and hopefully I can use them as my QB2. Maybe I can fill them in as a QB3 in Superflex. It might not happen. So you might need to move that pick or go wide receiver. It's a deep wide receiver class this year. There's some good running backs at the top, but I think the mid to late first this year are going to be wide receivers and quarterbacks. So right now, I need a quarterback in a league where I'm pretty much one elite quarterback away from contending. I have the 103, and I'm trying to move that pick to get Trey Lance. I'm trying to pile extra players and picks on to go get Trey Lance. So just know that going in, that the quarterbacks this year are going to be primed for rebuilding teams, but probably not as good for contenders. And Steph, one more name I want to throw out there. I think it's just about time to get into the running backs now. But one more name I want to throw out there in trade rumors is Gardner Minshew as a potential buy low. You know, he's my guy. You know, I've been all in on the Minshew hype train, and I think he's a extreme buy low, probably a mid third or a late like a mid third could probably get Gardner Minshew right now. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Eagles trade him. You just mentioned all the teams that need quarterback. I don't think they're all going to want to throw these raw rookies in right away. So I wouldn't be surprised to see someone go out and get Gardner Minshew. He played great last season when the opportunity was there. He's not a long-term solution for one of these teams, but from a fantasy perspective, I do think he can get it done. So Gardner Minshew is another name to keep an eye on.
And we'll see. We'll talk more once we get closer to rookie season, once we know landing spots. If a Sam Howell lands in a Pittsburgh, or if Matt Corral ends up in New Orleans, or Kenny Pickett goes to Denver, like those guys do become super, super interesting. But to your point, there is no Justin Fields, there is no Trevor Lawrence, there is no Trey Lance in this class. None of these guys, to me, outside of Malik Willis, really are appealing as rushing quarterbacks. I know Kenny Pickett can move around a little bit. He's kind of like a Baker Mayfield plus. If you want to frame it up that way as far as what he can do rushing the ball. But, you know, we don't have that guy who can just be a league winner like you and I have talked about with Justin Fields and Trey Lance, and even Trevor Lawrence to a degree. But let's shift over to some running backs. There's not a ton, to be honest with you. When I was doing the research, I was actually kind of shocked. Usually we think of there being a lot of running back landing spots. Granted, running backs usually don't get drafted into just open situations from day one. There's very few situations like Najee Harris saw where he gets drafted to be the full-blown workhorse from day one in an offense. That just doesn't happen. But there are 5 teams that when I was looking into the cap situation, who they had on the roster currently, could be looking into the free agent market or the rookie market, and that's Atlanta. They really didn't have a run game. It was Cordarrelle Patterson through the air was their run game, and Mike Davis falling forward for 15 carries a game in 2021. Tampa Bay with Leonard Fournette, now a free agent. He could be leaving with Tom Brady, with Godwin potentially leaving in free agency, with Gronk probably retiring. A lot of turnover in that Tampa Bay roster. They could be on the move for a running back. Ronald Jones, also a free agent. So they don't have anybody outside of Keyshawn Vaughn. And Gio Bernard is also a free agent, right? So it's literally just Keyshawn Vaughn is the RB1 right now in Tampa Bay. Fingers crossed in the leagues where I have him as a stash. Miami enters the fold. They're very high. They're number 2 right now with $64.7 million in cap space. They could go out and pay somebody a haul if they really wanted to improve that run game. It's out they're going to do it, but we'll see who takes over in that front office. And then the last 2, Seattle and Houston, teams that just there's a murky running back situation. They have older running backs. Like Rashad Penny in Seattle is now a free agent. We'll see if they resign him. My guess is that they will. For Chris Carson, I don't know if he's going to play again. And if he does, I don't know what his production is going to look like. Houston had this rotation of like 4 veterans that they gave the ball to throughout the year. So they're probably going to be looking for somebody to take over that roster or at least provide some depth. So Alex, when we're looking at the names here, it's Chase Edmonds, a free agent, Melvin Gordon, a free agent. We talked about him in the Javonte Williams recap last week. Leonard Fournette, I just talked about all the Tampa Bay running backs. I think Fournette still has some juice. He looked great in the playoffs. Would love to see him go somewhere and be a workhorse like Miami. Cordero Patterson, a fantasy relevant name that it could potentially be on the move. My guess is that Atlanta brings him back. And then there's a tier of just kind of these between the tackles, grinders, guys that we haven't seen a ton of production from. Sony Michel, James Conner, Marlon Mack, Ronald Jones headline that group. And there's a few other names in there, but aren't really worth discussing today. Alex, are there any names here, any landing spots here that get you super excited when we go through the free agency class of 2022 at the running back spot?
Yeah, you said it best. I mean, I think there's this free agency class at running back definitely lacks some juice, right? It's a lot of these veterans. I mean, you look at the top of the class, Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, and James Conner, and it's like those are the three veteran names from last year that everyone thought was washed up. And if you picked them in double-digit rounds, they led you to a fantasy championship. So for those guys, I typically tend to believe that them staying on the same team they're on is best for their situation. Like I can't imagine James Conner going somewhere else and improving his situation. I can't really imagine Melvin Gordon going somewhere else and improving his situation unless it happens to be one of these Atlantas, Miamis that's going to give him a workhorse role. If he's a number two somewhere else, I'm not sure about that. And obviously Javonte is concerning in Denver, but I think Melvin Gordon, we're probably looking at 1, maybe 2 more years of productivity. So when I look at this running back class, to me, it all comes down to not these guys themselves, but who's left in the backfield. Like I'm not going to go out and trade for Melvin Gordon. I'm not trying to buy low on James Conner right now. Like that's just not a winning formula in Dynasty, but some of these micro transactions can make a huge difference for you. Like if you were able to pick someone up off waivers, like Raheem Mostert's a name not on our list, but he's an unrestricted free agent and he's like about to be 30 years old. And we know what that means for running backs, but I just picked him up on waivers in a league, in a Dynasty league with 20 bench spots. And as a contender, I'm like, who knows if San Francisco brings him back and he has some RB2 value, if he goes somewhere else and has RB2 value just as a veteran, a change of pace guy with 12 touches a game. Those are the little things that add depth to your roster. I think Marlon Mack is another name in that category where he's probably on waivers in a lot of leagues. We're starting to see that these Achilles injuries aren't what we thought they were. Deontay Foreman, Cam Akers, we're actually seeing that narrative completely flip to the other side. Marlon Mack got a little bit of playing time this past season. So I think those are moves you can make easily. And to the guys that are left, yeah, it's Leonard Fournette, who's left in Tampa Bay. That's what I'm more interested in. And Melvin Gordon, who's left in Denver. Obviously, that impacts Javonte Williams' value. And then for Arizona, it's do Chase Edmonds or James Conner leave? Because if one of them leaves and one of them comes back, that has a significant impact. So this is where you kind of have to place your bets. Like if you're a Chase Edmonds owner, you could say, hey, if James Conner leaves and they stick with Chase Edmonds, this could mean some really, really good fantasy value for the next year or two if they don't bring anyone else in or draft anyone with significant draft capital. But on the flip side, if he goes somewhere else, you just start to wonder what that means. So this is where you kind of have to just put your chips on a couple players. I think with the receiver position, which we're about to get into, it matters a lot more. But these running backs, I think what they're leaving behind is going to be what to keep an eye on.
100%. And it's very rare that you actively want to go buy low on a veteran running back because they peak just so early in their careers. The actual production cliff is 24.8 years old. It's actually before 25. We always say 25 because we round up. Running back production peaks at 24.8 years old. So when you're looking at a name like James Conner, even Sony Michel, I was blown away to see that Sony Michel is still only 26 years old. I thought this guy was like 30 at this point.
Leonard Fournette too. I mean, he's still young.
Fournette's 26 and he's still putting up numbers. But for more than the landing spots or the situation that might leave behind, and I think to the point on Chase Edmonds is a scat bag plus. That's what he's always going to be. And the fact that they brought in James Conner tells us that's what he's going to be.
Yeah.
But for a name like Fournette, the buy low window already passed. You got the production out of him. If anything, I would just sell for anything you can get at this point. You don't want to be stuck holding the bag on a name like a Dalvin Cook or an Aaron Jones, and to a lesser degree, these Fournette and Melvin Gordon type names. Like you don't want to be stuck holding them at the end of a year where their trade value is absolute dust, right? You're trying to trade them high while you can. And if you are stuck holding on to an Aaron Jones, a Dalvin Cook, even a Derrick Henry could be put into that boat, or an Ezekiel Elliott. Your best, if you have them on your roster right now, your best situation is to just hold them throughout the offseason, wait till that production starts to play itself out, especially early in the year. If like somebody starts out hot, that's when you have to sell. And we'll keep talking about that throughout the season. But you're right. The most appealing part of this is the backfields that are clearing up. And really, it's just some offenses overall that are perfect hotbeds for new personnel. Right. So there's three that I kind of pulled out that are really like the three teams that have a ton of offensive turnover at the skill positions. You named one of them, Arizona. Right. They have Edmonds and Connor as free agents. Christian Kirk's a free agent. AJ Green's a free agent. Zach Ertz is a free agent, and they're 19th in cap space. So unless they can get a bunch of guys on the cheap, right? Bring Kirk back on the cheap. Bring AJ Green back on a veteran minimum. Bring Zach Ertz back at a super, super low cost. And I think for a lot of these guys, they actually will be able to bring them back. But this could be a totally new offense. They could turn this offense over. They could ask Rondale Moore to step up and then fill behind him on the wide receiver room with names in the draft, with some free agents here and there. I mean, the fact they signed AJ Green and Zach Ertz, obviously they were trying to contend this year, but it shows you what the perception of the front office is on that Arizona roster, right? They have a rookie quarterback under contract. They need to push their chips in right now because that's been the formula with, the Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson type names of the world that go out and get you close to a Super Bowl on their rookie deal. And we saw that with guys like Russell Wilson as far as like recent memory. But Tampa Bay is another team with Brady retiring, Gronk probably retiring, hasn't been officially announced yet. Antonio Brown is gone. Chris Godwin enters the free agent market. They're 18th in cap space. So a very, very similar situation, Arizona. Unless they can move some contracts around, they don't have a ton to play with as far as going out and making a splash quarterback signing, getting a workhorse to bring in the running back position. This team could very easily go into full rebuild because that's probably what they thought they were going to do, knowing that, hey, we have Tom Brady on the roster. Who cares about next year? We have freaking Tom Brady on the roster. Let's try to go win something. So now they're going to have to live with the decisions that they've made with that Brady situation. Mike Evans is really the only, solid guy that's still going to be there. Rojo, also free agent. I'm curious to hear when I'm done rambling here, if you have any thoughts on Rojo and free agency. But the last team here, New Orleans. Hey, their quarterback situation, Taysom Hill is the only guy in their contract. Traquan Smith is a free agent. Deontay Harris is a restricted free agent. Juwan Johnson is a ERFA, which is just, I think, another form of a restricted free agent with some additional contract caveats in there. They're negative $80 million in cap space right now. So, what is New Orleans even going to do? What are they going to do, bro? I don't even know. It seems like it's just going to be more of Kamara carrying the workload next year in New Orleans. I know they have some draft capital, but they tried to contend this year. They had a winning record, if I'm not mistaken, unless I just haven't checked.
The 49ers had a comeback win against the Rams in week 18. And if that doesn't happen, Saints are in the playoffs.
Right. They were a fringe playoff team. And they're hurting, bro. I don't know what New Orleans is going to do. They might have to let a lot of guys
for
walk.
A couple of years. Yeah, they're going to have to break it all down. So a random thought, Alvin Kamara, I think you mentioned Dalvin Cook earlier, Aaron Jones, you don't want to be caught holding the bag with these guys. I think for Jones, for Ezekiel Elliott, even for Dalvin Cook, we're starting to get there. I think we saw their value take a big hit this year. I don't think Kamara's value took quite as big a hit as those guys, but I think we could see that happen this year as he gets a year older, as we see this offense change, and as we could see this team really, really start to struggle in the coming years. So if you can sell Alvin Kamara for decent value, I'm talking I've been trying to sell him for a mid to late first plus a young running back. It's tough to do, but if you can get a Josh Jacobs in a mid to late first, or a David Montgomery in a mid to late first, a Travis Etienne in a mid to late first, those are the kind of deals I'm smashing all day. Haven't been able to pull it off yet. All you guys in the Pioneers League are a little too savvy because I guess you've been listening to us. But if you are listening and you want to do that, hit my inbox up. But yeah, Steph, it's getting brutal out there. New Orleans is in a tough situation.
Now let's shift over to wide receiver. Oh, go ahead.
Steph, before we go to wide receiver, I want to do one more thing with these running backs. We talked about Melgo, Fournette, some of these names, James Conner. We're a little too hesitant to buy low on them because they're just getting older. We don't want to hold that bag. But I want to know, if you have them on your roster, how low are you willing to go to sell these guys to not be holding that bag? So if you have Melvin Gordon and he's entering free agency and we know how old he is, and even if he stays in Denver, we see what Javonte can do. Melvin Gordon for a late second. Are you taking a late second for Melvin?
Yeah, I would at this point. Pretty much if I can get a second for any of these names, it's a win.
Yeah, I think for Melvin Gordon, James Conner, I put them in the same tier. I think Chase Edmonds as a scat back, I value a little bit more. I think he has PPR value beyond a couple of those guys, but we'll see where he goes. Because if Chase Edmonds goes to another team that's not going to feature him like Arizona would, I do worry about him. I think the strongest name in the free agent market, we've talked about it, is Leonard Fournette for sure. Like Leonard Fournette is the one that I do still think has juice, and I think he could go to another team and be a workhorse if Fournette doesn't stay in Tampa and he goes to an Atlanta, if he goes to a Miami, if he even goes to a Seattle, if they get rid of Penny and Chris Carson, if he goes to Houston, if he goes to anywhere that has a completely empty running back room and is that workhorse, he could be Jacksonville Leonard Fournette, which was a ton of volume, maybe not that efficient. He could be a Tampa Bay Leonard Fournette, ton of volume, not that efficient. So if he goes to one of these workhorse situations, that's been Leonard Fournette's career, has been, hey, let's get Leonard Fournette 3-4 targets a game. Let's give him the ball up to 15 times a game on the ground, and maybe he'll get a touchdown and he can give you that floor and be an RB1. So Leonard Fournette's the one guy on this list I'm remotely interested in. Everybody else is a hard sell. And even if I have Leonard Fournette, I'm probably willing to take a late first, even early second, and I'm willing to accept that offer and get rid of him.
With you 100% on that. I think best case scenario for Lenny is either two scenarios. One, he goes to Seattle and plays the Chris Carson role to a T. We saw them start using Chris Carson a lot more in the passing game when they were letting Russ cook early in the season this year and the season before. So I'd love to see Fournette there. He has that pass catching skill set for a guy his size, his speed. You should not be able to catch the ball that well. And I see Don Juan shouting out Jimmy G going to the Bucks. Watch. I can see it.
I can see it.
It's interesting. I could see it because the trade value on Jimmy G is so low. Like Jimmy G for fantasy is a streamer at absolute best. Even when he's in the 49ers, which has the best yards after the catch receiving core in the league, like he's still not even putting up numbers really. So how excited does that get you? It keeps the offense stable. Like I think Mike Evans would be okay with Jimmy G. Like I don't think he would absolutely be outside the top 24 wide receivers in fantasy, but it might be, same old. But let's get to the part that everybody wants to touch on here. Okay, really wide where receivers. We can spend some time. It's the wide receiver position because wide receiver free agents matter, right? We've seen guys go to new teams, new landing spots, and produce more than they ever have in their entire career. We saw DeAndre Hopkins go from Houston to Arizona and put up career numbers and was a stud wide receiver in fantasy football. We saw Stephon Diggs get traded from Minnesota to Buffalo. And even this year, now the names were kind of, there were no like headliners. Like Will Fuller flamed out. Kenny Golladay flamed out. I'm trying to think, were there any other splash wide receiver signings that really hit for fantasy in 2021?
No, not at all.
So now this year we come into a class.
Last year we saw a lot of the big free agents last year. If you remember, Chris Godwin, franchise tagged. Allen Robinson, franchise tagged. There was a lot of hype around last year's class. I believe Amari Cooper was going to be – no, it was 2 years ago with Amari Cooper. But Kenny Golladay was a name in there as well. You already mentioned him. But in terms of guys that actually switched teams and made a splash, it was fairly minimal.
Now this year we have a wide receiver free agent class that's pretty loaded. Like, and I'll talk real quickly about a deal I just made to acquire Juju, and I actually sold Michael Gallup in that deal. So 2 free agent wide receivers. Obviously, Michael Gallup coming off the ACL. I wanted Juju for that win now type production. I just think Juju is a better player for fantasy than Michael Gallup. They play completely different roles as far as what they've done on the field, but I'd rather have Juju on my roster than Michael Gallup right now. But the names are Devontae Adams. So right off the bat, I mean, a wide receiver one, potentially the wide receiver one, as long as he's on the field with Aaron Rodgers over the last couple of seasons in pretty much all formats. So he's going to hit the free agent market. That whole Rodgers situation, it's looking more like they're just going to go back to Green Bay and just sign everybody on 1 or 2 year deals and try to just run it back and probably lose in the first or second round of the playoffs for the next couple of years. But Chris Godwin, we've already seen, shout out in the chat, who was that? Don Juan asking about Chris Godwin. And I see some Juju talk in there as well. Mike Williams is also on the list. Odell Beckham Jr. is a free agent. Now, I think he'll probably get re-signed to the Rams, especially if they win the Super Bowl next week. But he's another name to keep an eye on. He could be going somewhere to just try to get that monster contract and really reap what he's sown in LA over this playoff stretch. Allen Robinson is now a free agent, wants to get the heck out of Chicago as fast as he can, I would presume. Mike Williams is a guy that I think a lot of teams would pay up big for his skill set.
Mm-hmm.
You look at a team like Philadelphia that needs that outside clasher to help that offense continue to move. So he's a name I look at, and I'll get into some of the landing spots here. But Cleveland is another one. They need an outside playmaker. We'll see how much volume he'll get and how efficient he'll be because Odell couldn't get it done. But maybe you see Cleveland try to go out and get an Alpha X wide receiver 1. I'd love if they go with a Treylon Burks in the draft. But they could go for a name like Mike Williams. Juju's in there. DJ Chark is a free agent. I think Jacksonville will probably try to bring him back, but who knows? That's another guy that a lot of teams, if they can't find that name in the rookie draft, they might just say, hey, we'll take DJ Chark coming off an injured year on the cheap and see what he can do for us. Christian Kirk, coming off a very productive season, has a pretty solid resume of production in the NFL. He's not a game breaker for fantasy football, but has always been kind of in that flex range over the last couple of years. And what he's done on the field has, I think a team will be willing to pay to bring him in if Arizona doesn't re-sign him. And there's a few other like filler names like Will Fuller, James Washington, who's still not even 26 years old yet. He's been stuck in that loaded Pittsburgh Steelers depth chart. He's a free agent. He was requesting a trade over the season. He's a guy that when he has been on the field, he has flashed. So we could see him go to a different team. Probably wants to get out of Pittsburgh with questions at the QB position. Emmanuel Sanders was on a 1-year veteran deal. AJ Green, we already talked about him. Alan Lazard and Marquez Valdez-Scantling are both also free agents along with Devontae Adams. So that whole receiving core of Adams, Lazard, MVS are all free agents, bro. And I don't know what Green Bay is going to do. It could be
go pick up Amari Rodgers.
Tough sledding. I guess that's the takeaway for where we're at right now. Go get Amari Rodgers because he's the only guy who has long-term commitment from the team. And then Russell Gage is a free agent. And then there's 2 restricted free agents that are fantasy relevant. Jacoby Myers, who I think New England will 100% bring back. And then Jalen Guyton, who's been that just pure deep threat on the Chargers. I think they'll bring him back on a pretty cheap deal from the Chargers' perspective. But Alex, let's start with Godwin. Because the Adams situation, it's like no amount of analysis and back and forth that we can have on the show is going to tell us what's going to happen with this Rodgers situation. Seems like the smokescreen that's getting floated out right now is that he could go to Tennessee, which to me, I don't know. We call it a conspiracy theory. It seems like they're just trying to draw distraction away from the Brian Flores, Dan Snyder situation, these bad headlines in the NFL that could come out right now. They're like, just throw out some Rodgers news out there, just make something up and send it out there. So let's talk about Godwin because he's the one still super young. He's a stud for fantasy. Do we see him go to a Las Vegas? Do we see him go to a Chicago, right? With Allen Robinson gone, they need an Alpha X. Could he go to New England and be that stud piece on the offense and their wide receiver group?
Yeah, I think Godwin's going to leave. I know that in Tampa, he would have a clearer role now. I mean, he already had a clear role. He was, for all intents and purposes, the number 1 target for Brady, but he was, giving up a lot to Gronk, to Mike Evans, to AB. So I know now if we say AB's out of the fold, Gronk is likely to retire. Godwin could come back and have a big role, but I think at this point, it's almost like once you've been there and done that, and once you've competed, you want to compete. And like Mike Evans, he's been in Tampa for so long. He's not even a free agent. Like he's locked in. If he was to be a free agent, I might think the same. I might think he wants to go to a contender now that he has competed. But I think Godwin's going to go somewhere else. I think he wants to be that alpha wide receiver 1. And there's a lot of teams in play that would be very interesting for Chris Godwin. You mentioned a few of them. I think New England is an interesting landing spot. I do worry about the upside there because we're going to need to see Mac Jones accelerate that volume. If Chris Godwin is going to get it done, they still have guys like Jacoby Myers. They have the 2 tight ends. They do disperse that passing game a lot. But we did see Stephon Diggs have a similar situation where he was a number one somewhere, went to a new team, and that volume just got escalated to the next level. So if we saw a 160 target Chris Godwin with Mac Jones, sky's the limit in New England. So I like that. I think the Bears are interesting as well. Pair him with Justin Fields. They have Darnell Mooney. I think other guys on this list are better fits for the Bears. I think Mike Williams is one specifically where you pair Darnell Mooney's skill set with a big target that can get downfield in the red zone like Mike Williams. And that could be an interesting pairing. But another spot for Chris Godwin, and it was one last season as well, as the Indianapolis Colts. I know I'm a little bit biased, but I'm a big Colts fan. But the Colts always have cap space. They're still towards the top in cap space. They're talking about wanting to make a splash. We'll see if they make a move with Carson Wentz. I don't think they will unless there's a clear upgrade. So unless they can get a Rodgers, a Russell Wilson, someone like that, I can't imagine them moving for a Derek Carr or a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Kirk Cousins. Maybe, but we'll see. But the Colts need to make some moves. They're in a win now window. And if you pair a Chris Godwin with a Michael Pittman, especially now that we're going to have T.Y. Hilton either leaving the team or likely retiring this season, I think with that line with Jonathan Taylor, it takes the offense to a new dimension. Say what you want about Carson Wentz. I have reservations about him as well, but the receiving core is probably in the bottom half of the league at this point. So give him Chris Godwin and we'll see what happens. It sure helped Josh Allen when Stephon Diggs got there. So I think Chris Godwin is going to leave. But in terms of optimal landing spot, I think the Patriots, the Colts, or even you mentioned the Las Vegas Raiders, where he could be that clear one, are interesting. But you have guys like Renfrow and Waller as well. So I'm having a little bit of trouble thinking of a team he could go to that has a good quarterback or a decent quarterback, and B, where he would be that clear alpha wide receiver one target. And I think the Raiders, Patriots, and Colts are probably the ones that best fit that whole notion. So I do expect him to leave Tampa, though, so it'll be interesting.
I like the Indy take there because they can let Michael Pittman continue to be the outside playmaker and then have Godwin just be that PPR machine. Right now, the Colts are 7th in the NFL in cap space with $37.7 million. They have the budget to go out and bring in a Chris Godwin on a 4 to 5 year deal and just do this thing right and continue to build around Carson Wentz or whoever that quarterback is going to be in Indy. They seem to just be continually contending and always top 10 in available cap space. Maybe Godwin is maybe, that's the reason why they don't go in on Chris Godwin, is because they'd rather find names through the draft, go get, go and dig into the bargain bin for who's going to be in their wide receiver group, but would love to see Godwin in Indy.
It's not going to be Paris Campbell, I'll tell you that.
Oh, man. R.I.P. Campbell.
If he could just stay healthy, we'd see. But, yeah, I think Godwin would be a good fit for the Colts.
Now, Allen Robinson. And we could even lump in Odell Beckham. All right, they're both these guys that get up on the outside but are a little bit older. The track record over the last 2 to 3 years is a little bit suspect, but there's been some bright spots. I tend to think Odell's going back to the Rams because he wants to be in that big market. He's already proven himself to the team. He's building that rapport with Stafford. I think the Rams are just going to try to run it back. Like, they've shown that with the new stadium, with McVay, that they just want to keep contending. They haven't had a first-round pick in like 6 years. I really do think Odell's going back. So for Allen Robinson, Kansas City is one that comes to mind. Kansas City needs that reliable outside X receiver. They can probably get Allen Robinson for really, really cheap. There's not a guy that has proven outside of Adams and Godwin, obviously. A-Rob is the name that's like super cheap right now that can still be that target magnet and would complement, wouldn't take anything away from Tyreek Hill playing that stretch Z plus that he's played. Kelsey, who is getting older now, but is still a stud at the tight end position. They could have A-Rob come in and play that like Sammy Watkins plus role. And same with a name like Juju Smith-Schuster appearing on that roster in Kansas City. But what do you think about A-Rob? Are there some landing spots you'd love to see him go? And I know we've talked about his dynasty value already.
Yeah, A-Rob, I think from a dynasty perspective, there's two ends here. Like, if you're competing and you are pretty deep at the wide receiver spot and you have A-Rob, like, I think he's honestly, I'm willing to sell low on him. Like, I have him in a league we're in together, Stef, and he's my wide receiver 5. And like Gallup is my wide receiver 6, and he could turn into something. So like for me in a league where we start 2 wide receivers and there's one flex, if someone was to offer me an early second, like the 203 for Allen Robinson, I'm just going to take it because I'm really not going to use him this year. and he's fading out of value. So I'm easily willing to take a early to mid second for Allen Robinson. But I see on the flip side, if you are competing and you're in a deeper league and you have 2 flex spots or 3 wide receiver spots, and you have a little bit of a hole and you're like, dang, that second flex spot, I just need a name that I can rely on. No, he might not be, this top 12 wide receiver again, but I think names like Allen Robinson, names like Juju Smith-Schuster, and then even a tier down, names like a Michael Gallup are 3 guys you can buy pretty low right now. And it's like, hey, why not send out a mid-second for Juju? Why not send out, if you have another one, a mid-second for Allen Robinson, kind of use this spray tactic. And it's like, hey, I'm going to bring these guys in on the cheap, buy them all low, and chances are at least one of them is going to work out and you're able to fill that spot and compete. So for Allen Robinson, I like the Chiefs option. We had guys flash for them like Pringle. I think Pringle is my wife's favorite NFL player at this point. So she'd be pretty bummed if he got phased out of the offense. But I think another thing to think about is because we have so many good wide receiver free agents, that's also going to add additional vacancies, if you will. So obviously if Mike Williams comes back to the Chargers, they're not going to sign anybody else. But say Mike Williams does go somewhere else, why would the Chargers not want to bring in a name like an Allen Robinson? Imagine him with Justin Herbert alongside Keenan Allen. So I think there's a couple interesting spots like that. Like obviously the Chargers would be a primo landing spot. Like if Mike Williams leaves, whatever wide receiver they sign, if it is a decent name that we're talking about here, that's going to be a prime landing spot. I think the Chiefs, obviously, anytime you're tied to Patrick Mahomes, that's a good landing spot. Another one, I hate to say this, I really do, but I think the Atlanta Falcons is an interesting landing spot in the short term.
I was just about to bring that up.
It's looking like they're more and more likely to trade Calvin Ridley by the day. So if they do, and Ridley is truly phased out of that organization, yes, they have Kyle Pitts, but they have pretty much nothing left. I mean, Russell Gage has been decent, but if Allen Robinson, wow, see, everyone's a free agent these days. But if Allen Robinson was to go to the Falcons, you and I feel some type of way about Matt Ryan. We both feel like they need to call it quits and say, hey, you're not a contender anymore. Let's move on. But the Falcons don't tend to agree with us. So as long as Matt Ryan's the starter, they're going to continue to be a pass-first offense. That's what they've always been with Matt Ryan. They've always struggled in the running game. Arthur Smith coming from Tennessee did not help that. Cordell was decent, but they were still trailing in games. They were still a pass-happy offense. So if Allen Robinson was to go be this funnel for Matt Ryan, him and Kyle Pitts, I think that could help his value just from a volume play. And it would be an interesting landing spot. I think best case for him, he can go somewhere with an upgrade at quarterback. I think Justin Fields is going to be great, but the situation has just been turmoil in Chicago. Matt Nagy didn't help. But if he can go to a competent offense with a competent quarterback and be that target volume funnel again, I think it would be interesting. And I think Atlanta is one of the few places where he can truly do that.
Yeah, Atlanta could be wide open. I mean, if Ridley doesn't come back or takes another year off, or maybe even never plays again, we don't really know what's going on. Whenever somebody says mental health, you just don't know to what degree that is. Like, we can't look at it like an injury and be like, oh, he'll be back, in 6 months, fully healthy, ready to go. We just don't know. So there is upside in that Atlanta offense.
Stef, I have one more thing to throw out.
They're not going to rebuild. Atlanta's not going to rebuild. As much as we don't want them to, they're not going to rebuild. And it's sad.
What would you think? I don't necessarily think this is going to happen based on the state of the organization. What about an Allen Robinson return to Jacksonville?
Ooh.
DJ Chark is a free agent. Laviska Shenault has been up and down. We'll see. I know you and I were huge on him going into this year. That has definitely changed to this point. Marvin Jones is another veteran, so Marvin Jones is kind of filling that role. I feel like Allen Robinson would have. But an Allen Robinson return to Jacksonville might be interesting with Trevor Lawrence, new coaching staff. Who knows?
Anytime there's a new coaching staff, it presents even more opportunity for whoever they bring in, right? We saw the Marvin Jones, and you and I were on the Marvin Jones hype train in redraft as if a flex name that you can grab and pick up. Now, he flamed out down the stretch, which is to be expected for a 31-year-old wide receiver on the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? But that situation, right? Urban Meyer coming in, bringing in Brian Dable. Or I'm sorry, was it Brian Dable in Jacksonville? I think it might have been somebody else. Darren Bevel. Sorry, Darren Bevel. Darren Bevel going into Jacksonville as the OC had that relationship with Marvin Jones from his days in Detroit, brings in Jones to play the X, right? And get the volume. And he was on pace for 150 targets to start the year. I remember 5 weeks into the season, we're like, dude, buy Marvin Jones because he's on pace for a nasty stat line at the end of the year. Didn't come to fruition with the injuries and just the team going full tank after Urban had his theatrics going on. That whole thing, like the wheels fell off on that offense. But we could see that again in Miami. We could see that again in Jacksonville. We could see that again in Houston, where there's a head coach vacancy, a front office vacancy. We might even see that in Minnesota, where they want to bring in either an existing receiver that they have a relationship, the coaching staff, or just a guy that they really like, that they want to have on their roster. Would Juju Smith-Schuster be a great number 2 in Minnesota behind Justin Jefferson, with Thielen now age 31 coming off an ACL tear? They have Amir Smith-Marset and KJ Osborne on that depth chart behind him. Like, I would love to see Juju in a number 2 role behind Jay Jets. They keep Kirk Cousins there to keep dishing the rock. It's not the worst thing that would happen to his value. You know, and same thing with the DJ Chark. Put him on a team like the Chargers. Now, they don't have the head coaching turnover that we're talking about, but if Jalen Guyton leaves as a restricted free agent, maybe they don't want to bring him back in. Maybe they want to push all their chips in, winning on a win now season with Herbert on his rookie deal. What if you have DJ Chark coming back with Mike Williams coming back, and he's the number 3 with Jared Cook leaving in free agency, and now he's the clear number 3 on the Chargers? That's going to have fantasy value. He'd be a DFS darling if he were to play that Jalen Guyton role on the Chargers. The unfortunate reality for us as fantasy gamers and as guys that just love talking about different landing spots, free agents, and just kind of going through these different theories about NFL personnel, is most of these guys will probably just get re-signed to the team that they're on. That's just what we see in the NFL.
That's
like,
true.
Do you agree with me, Alex, on that? Like,
yeah, we see it time and time again. A lot of these guys probably won't hit the open market. Like, there's 2 categories here. It's one, there's a re-signing window where teams can bring guys back before anyone else has a chance to sign them. That's going to happen for some of these guys. So if we revisit here in a couple weeks, like, there's a good chance some of these guys are off the market. But then even once they hit open free agency, some guys do eventually decide to just come back to the team they were on. The market's not as hot as they thought they were. I know last year was a special year, though, because the market was so constricted and the salary cap was not going up. A lot of that was COVID related. So actually last season, we saw a lot of guys coming back to the team they were originally on these small 1-year deals.
Juju.
A lot of guys got franchise tagged. Yeah, Juju came back on a small a 1-year deal that wasn't as much as he could have gotten in a normal year because the salary cap was not increasing at its normal scale. So there is some pent up demand with these free agents, which does make me think this year we might see more movement than usual, definitely more than last year that in 2021. So I think there's a lot of interesting names here that are on the move. A lot of them are going to be tied to these quarterbacks as well. The quarterback movement is going to dictate the market. There is going to be a domino effect, if you will. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Now, of these names, are there any that you're buying? And I'll tell you right now, I've sent a few offers where I've included Odell Beckham as part of the deal in a contending roster. I actually tried to trade Aaron Rodgers, and I can't remember who my receiver was. It was like Adam Thielen or somebody like that, for Matt Stafford and Odell Beckham. Trying to get that stack, right? Betting on Cooper Kupp just not sustaining the production you saw this year. Robert Woods coming back, but being 29 years old. Odell Beckham might just be the guy in a funneled situation. We saw him in these playoff games. Like, he's putting up very similar numbers to Cooper Kupp in these games. Over 100 yards, receiving consistently. We've seen him already score touchdowns. He's a guy that I'm putting offers out on in contending rosters where I just need another receiver to help me get over the hump that I can plug into my flex, plug into my wide receiver 2 or 3 spot. Alex, are there other names that you would be, quote unquote, buying at the moment?
Well, there's one reason, Steph, I think we have to be careful about buying low on Odell Beckham Jr. And it's the same reason we wouldn't buy low on Van Jefferson, even though he's not going to be a free agent. And his name's Robert Woods. Like, we forget Robert Woods. Odell Beckham came in the week Robert Woods tore his ACL. So he took on that number 2 role. And when Robert Woods is healthy, I do believe Robert Woods is going to step back into that role behind Cooper Kupp. So Odell is then relegated to this number 3 role. Van is still going to be there as well. Higbee is used at the tight end spot. The targets are immediately very spread out. and we know who the funnel is on that team. So I think OBJ, even if he returns to the Rams, does give me some concern. But there's some deeper names on this list I'm interested in. I think some of the ones we talked about, we said kind of the situation, like if you're in need of that flex, that wide receiver 3, and you want to send out some mid to late seconds and buy low on the Jujus of the world, Mike Williams, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, I think that's very much in play. I think Christian Kirk is very interesting. I had Kirk for a lot of this season in redraft and in a dynasty league, and he was a wide receiver 2 for the majority of the season. Ended up, I want to say, a wide receiver 26, but Christian Kirk was giving you PPR, wide receiver 2 value. So in a 2 wide receiver 2 flex league, that was fantastic. And I think if he is re-signed to Arizona, AJ Green could hit the road, which could help him retain that role that he has. And then I think there are a lot of teams that could use Christian Kirk as that wide receiver too. I think the Chiefs are in play. They're obviously one of those teams we keep throwing out there that are in need of a wide receiver. So I think the Chiefs would be interesting. I think the Indianapolis Colts would be interesting. You think about pairing him with Michael Pittman. Pittman as that field stretcher, that big body guy. Kirk more as that slot guy who can get deep as well. So I think there are some places where Christian Kirk could go, and he's not thought of as a big fantasy name. People don't really like him in fantasy. They think of him as this, maybe a wide receiver 3 flex type name in good matchups, kind of boom or bust. And that's what he has been to this point in his career. But I tell you, 2021 was different for Christian Kirk. And he's typically not the name I like in leagues that aren't as deep. Like if you're in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league and it's 12 team, I'm not as sold on Christian Kirk because I don't really think the upside is there. But I think you can probably get Christian Kirk for a late second. If you're in a league where you need a wide receiver and you need a guy who can give you some wide receiver 2 type production, I think Christian Kirk is a great name because he can do just that. He's only 25 years old, so he's still on his first contract and he still has a lot to give in the league.
I want to run through a few more landing spots. Make sure we check all the boxes on these free
I think Houston is interesting. I think Houston is very interesting. Someone we haven't talked about.
We haven't talked about them. And, we had some questions on our Discord where there were some deals actually involving Deshaun Watson in Dynasty. And we were like, look, if you can help it, don't take on that risk. That it's in the range of outcomes that Deshaun Watson never plays again. Like, that's reasonable, right? If we threw that out there, if we said that take a year from now and it was true, no one would be surprised. I'm actually throwing Nico Collins into the back end in a lot of deals right now because I think he can be that number 2 behind Brandon Cooks. I also like Melvin Gordon. I've talked about him on our rookie recap.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have some interesting pieces that they just pulled in the draft. With some of that turnover or even Deshaun Watson coming back, they could be interesting. But let me hit on some of these wide receiver landing spots. You throw out Indianapolis. I've thrown out Cleveland, right? They have Jarvis Landry, an aging Jarvis Landry, and then not much else. It's Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's Anthony Schwartz, who they took in the 3rd round just as an outside burner, kind of a gadget guy. Same with Demetric Felton. So Cleveland could be looking for an X. I hope it's Treylon Burks, but we will see. Chicago has Darnell Mooney as a stretch receiver plus. We saw him be a target magnet this year in a funneled situation and actually produce pretty well from a fantasy perspective. We're talking in the Discord. Shout out to Phil. I see you in the chat, Phil. His prediction is that this year, a lot of teams will be looking to pair college wide receivers with college quarterbacks coming off this Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase rise to prominence that we've seen. Maybe Chicago goes out and drafts Chris Olave to play, essentially be that they move Mooney into this PPR monster, and then they move Olave into the outside to play that downfield role because we saw Fields and Olave have that connection in Ohio State and Fields' junior year. Las Vegas, Zay Jones right now, which you and I have said, Zay Jones actually looks good. He is a free agent. They could bring him back. Brian Edwards can't seem to find his way into consistent production and snap share. So maybe, we've talked about the Derek Carr to Devontae Adams college connection. Maybe Adams tries to go reconnect with Carr in Vegas if Rodgers retires or Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay is almost dead last in cap space. They have negative $46 million in cap space. I don't know if they necessarily have the funds to bring back Rodgers, Adams, Lazard, MVS.
They don't.
And a lot of the defensive pieces that are free agents as well. So we might see, even with Rodgers coming back to Green Bay, they might not be able to give Adams the money that he's hoping for. And he says, well, fine, I'll just go to Las Vegas, team up with Carr on a team that has a desperate Antonio Brown-sized hole on the outside at wide receiver and are currently sitting at 15th with $21.3 million in cap space right now. So they have the money to go and make that splash signing for 2022 and beyond. Green Bay, obviously, a lot of questions there. Detroit is another team where we could see an Alpha X wide receiver land, either in the draft. I doubt they do it through free agency because they're going through a rebuild the way that they'd
have to pay someone so much money to go to Detroit right now.
But they are one that needs a outside X receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of weapons. It'd be a convoluted passing game, but I'm keeping my eyes on it. The Chargers, if Mike Williams leaves, that could be huge. New England needs that outside red zone threat. I have seen rumors, little whispers here and there of Calvin Ridley potentially going to New England. I think that'd be really, really interesting. It would be a downgrade from his spot in Atlanta from a fantasy perspective, but could be really, really strong for New England to try to go all in and make a playoff run behind the Bills in the AFC. Atlanta, we've talked about them. Philadelphia, right? They have Devontae Smith. He can be a great Z receiver. He could even move Devonta Smith to the slot because Jalen Reagor didn't hit. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside didn't hit. This is a team that needs to continue to address the wide receiver room despite all their misses. We'll see if they do it, but I've heard people saying, hey, Drake London would be a great fit, or Treylon Burks would be a great fit, or even Garrett Wilson in Philly. So they might address in the draft, but they could if they feel like, hey, we have this diamond in the rough that we found in Jalen Hurts on day 2 of the draft. And shout out to Andy. He's like, Treylon Burks to Cleveland, vomit. And I agree from a fantasy perspective. I'd hate to see it. But from a Cleveland fan perspective, I'd love to see it because we need somebody there. But we talked about Kansas City. We talked about Indianapolis. Those are all the landing spots that I had. The landing spots aren't the end-all be-all. You know, we know that at this point that player talent, player skill is going to win out in the end, even if it takes them time. And we even saw that. We see that all the time with running backs. I mean, gosh, from DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor's, Cam Akers of the world, just give them enough time and they're going to produce.
Javonte, we're seeing it with Javonte.
Javonte Williams, another one where they don't need to have a wide open running back room for those guys to produce. Same thing in these wide receiver rooms. But we'll continue to assess throughout the season. We'll be giving you all our takes. Keep following on the Discord. If you guys like what we do here on the show, a like and a sub, greatly appreciated. There really aren't any key tight ends hitting the free agent market. Mike Gesicki is probably the biggest one. And I think Miami will just end up re-signing him because he did a lot. And Hunter Long, who they took in the draft, didn't really do much. Alex, are you still with me or am I flying solo on this thing?
Sorry. Technical difficulty. I'm back.
Okay. Thank God. I thought I was going to have to talk about tight end free agents by myself.
Accidentally X'd out of this, picking up Amari Rodgers in our home Dynasty league. So that had to get done what I had to get done. But yeah, Steph, we got a couple minutes here left to talk about tight ends. I know there's so many wide receivers and running backs. It's like hard not to spend the majority of our time talking about, but we'll hit on tight ends very briefly here, because there are some interesting names, and I think there are some interesting implications. So, got Mike Gesicki. You know, he's kind of the bigger name in this class. Some older guys: Zach Ertz, Conklin, Jared Cook, Evan Ingram in New York, Hayden Hurst, and CJ Uzama we have on our list. And I think the biggest guy for me, and you're going to know this when I say it, I haven't stopped talking about him as an interesting option, is David Njoku. Just because I think from an athletic profile perspective, he has what it takes to actually be, you know, in a Kyle Pitts-like role for a team where he is used as a passing threat. We saw flashes of that in Cleveland last season with some of his pop games. So I think David Njoku is very interesting, and he is by far my biggest buy low at the tight end spot. You see Cleveland with Hooper and Harrison Bryant now at the tight end spot. So if Jared Cook leaves LA, and this is my dream scenario, if Jared Cook leaves LA and they sign David Njoku, they could have something really special there. And I think we could see a David Njoku breakout. And you got to think about the tight end spot. People like have this narrative about David Njoku not being able to catch anything. And I will just say, no, he doesn't have the best hands in the world, but his drops have gotten better and better over the last couple of years. A lot of that was his rookie and second year narrative. He's cleaned it up. And a lot of these tight ends don't break out until late in their career. Kelsey didn't. George Kittle took a couple of seasons. Darren Waller was like bouncing in and out of the league before he broke out, but he had an athletic profile. So if David Njoku lands in the right spot, I think he could be someone that jumps into that upper echelon. Not saying it's likely, but I'm saying it's possible.
Yeah, and Njoku is definitely a one to keep an eye on. You have him right now in Dynasty on your roster, just keep him. Just see what happens, because I don't think you're not going to get much value back for him. It's like, might as well just hold on to this dart throw that you had anyways, probably just on the back of your bench. He was a first round pick. David Njoku was the 29th overall pick in 2017. So this is still a tight end with first round draft capital that has the athletic profile of the Noah Fants and the TJ Hawkinsons of the world. Hasn't had the production, but is certainly an interesting dart throw. Some of the landing spots that are wide open for tight ends right now, with some of the free agent names baked in, right? Miami, they just took Hunter Long, but they might need a tight end if Gesicki leaves. I tend to think that Gesicki will be back. Arizona has Zach Ertz on a free agent deal. They tried to go all in to contend this year. He's a free agent. And I see, shout out to Phil talking about Dalton Schultz. Is that who you're talking about, Phil?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, Dalton Schultz is a free agent.
They're bringing him back. They're going to release Blake Jarwin, and they're going to.
I think they will, and I think they won't re-sign Michael Gallup, and I think they'll bring him back. But Dalton Schultz has flashed, and if they don't, he's going to have a market. But I do tend to think he'll be back in Dallas as well.
Tampa Bay is another open landing spot with Gronk. He hasn't officially retired yet, but my guess is that he will with no Brady.
Yeah, O.J. Howard's a free agent as well, so.
O.J. Howard, a free agent for the tight end room in Tampa Bay's clearing up. Could just be Cameron Brate for another year. Who knows? Cincinnati with C.J. Uzomah as a free agent name. They could technically address that tight end room with Drew Sample being more of a blocking back and not a pass catching back. You talked about the Chargers. Jacksonville had a rotation of like 7 guys at tight end from
Dan
Tim
Arnold's
Tebow.
looking good.
Dan Arnold, I know, bro. I had Dan Arnold in our 14-team home league in redraft, and it was incredible. It was like, wow, I literally pulled this guy out the waiver wire, and he's putting up tight end one.
They went out and traded for Dan Arnold, and he was putting up numbers. Like, I was flexing him in a tight end premium league, and he was giving me good value in a deeper tight end premium league. So, like, Dan, he's not a free agent, but I think Jacksonville, Dan Arnold, like, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to rely on that tight end spot. So not a free agent, but another tight end name because he got hurt at the end of the season, and some people just haven't heard of him. But Dan Arnold had a really good stretch, and I think that's going to continue. He was their target leader for a lot of weeks there in a row. So if you can throw out a mid-third for Dan Arnold, I'm taking that all day. I think you can start him for the majority of next season.
Wow, I love it. He's an undrafted free agent, but when he's been on the field, he's flashed. 51 targets in 2021, caught 35 of them for 408 yards. No touchdowns, unfortunately, but that just makes him an even greater buy low. And he's a guy that the NFL has told us they value his skill set. The last one I'll throw out there is Carolina. It's kind of a gross landing spot, but they drafted Tommy Tremble, only saw 35 targets. Ian Thomas is essentially just toast at this point. So that's another one where they could use a David Njoku type name to come in and be a pass-catching tight end. But, Alex, enough tight end talk. I can't handle any more of these gross, super deep names that are probably going to be irrelevant for fantasy. Any other situations, players that we need to talk about before we sign off? And if you're following with us, hit us up in the chat. You got any questions? You want us to take a look at your Dynasty roster, give some feedback on trades? We'll do that here for the last couple minutes, but Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, put me on the spot there. I don't have anything, man. I feel like we were pretty comprehensive. I know there's a lot of deep names we didn't get to, but that's why we're in the Discord. That's why we're going to have these spreadsheets, these tools, these resources to get into these free agent names and where they go, tracking how their value shifts. So for me, it's like, hey, my biggest piece of advice right now would be just pick a couple of these guys you believe in. If there's a talent you believe in that's a free agent, you got to bet on the talent. There were a couple situations last year I was holding Kenyon Drake, and he was an unrestricted free agent. I was like, oh, if he goes to one of these Atlanta, Miami, the Jets, and he has this workhorse situation, it could be great. I didn't believe in the talent, but I was just hoping I'd win the lottery and get lucky with Kenyon Drake. Obviously, it didn't work out like that, and his value absolutely cratered. So if I could give one piece of advice, it's like pick a couple of these free agents that might be buy lows that you still believe in the talent and go bet on those guys. And if the landing spot works out in a perfect world, good for you. And even if it doesn't, if you do believe in that talent, you should still see return on value for that buy low. So now is a good time to buy these free agents. We haven't hit the Super Bowl yet. The second that happens, it's going to shift to the combine. It's going to shift to talking about these guys and the landing spots and the shuffling and the trades. So now is the time when people aren't thinking about free agency, when you need to go make that move. So this is your last buy low window for these next couple of weeks before these values could start rising. So that's my biggest piece of advice. But if you've got questions about players, your leagues, hop in that Discord and ask Stef and I and our community, man. We got some OGs in there that are experienced Dynasty players. They're giving out good advice. We got Phil like talking people through their first startup draft and helping them along the way. And we're all jumping in as a community to win some of these leagues and helping these startups and get ahead of your competition. So if that's you, hop in that Discord. It's a great place to be.
Totally. And we appreciate y'all listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.